I am Olivia Mitchell, 32 years old. Despite my difficult career path, where I have reached the top, I have never been good to my father. Christmas is coming soon, and this year I'm afraid of it like fire. I bought my father a luxurious gift worth $50,000 to make peace with him and hoped that everything would change. At that time, I didn't know that I had a document with me that would turn our family's life upside down. By the end of the holiday, I realized that no matter how hard I tried, I had always been a disgrace to my parents. Before I tell you this shocking story, subscribe so you don't miss other stories like this, and stay in the know. The thing about growing up in a house like mine is that the air is never really warm, even in summer. You could have the heat on, the fireplace lit, sun pouring in through the windows, and still it felt cold. Not physically, emotionally, spiritually. Like no matter what you did, you were always wearing something invisible and heavy. For me, it was my father's silence. I'm Olivia Mitchell, 32 years old, founder of a tech company that just got acquired for millions. I have a corner office, an assistant, and a bank account that could make people sit up straighter when I walk into a room. But none of that matters when I come back home. Because here, in the Mitchell house, success is measured differently. It's measured in degrees and awards and prestigious internships. It's measured by how closely you resemble my older brother Jason, Golden Boy Jason, Dr. Jason. Dr. Mitchell, just like his father, my mother would say at every fundraiser, her voice practically glowing. At family dinners, my father would always begin with his favorite question. So, who did something worth mentioning today? It wasn't really a question. It was an invitation for Jason to speak. I started assisting in a spinal reconstruction surgery today, Jason would say, almost shyly, like he hadn't been waiting all day to drop that line. My father's eyes would gleam, and he'd give that small nod, the one I used to live for. And then it would be my turn. I launched the beta version of our new app today. We hit 10,000 users in 24 hours. My father would grunt, not even looking up from his plate. Still playing with computers? Still playing with computers. I could have screamed, but I didn't. I never did. I just swallowed the insult and chewed my food like it didn't taste like ash in my mouth. The older I got, the more that silence filled the space between us. He never yelled, never said I was worthless. But he didn't have to. He just ignored. He praised Jason for tying his shoes properly when we were kids, but couldn't bother to show up the day my company went public. My mother smiled through it all, convincing herself that he was just old-fashioned. They didn't come to the award ceremony when I got named in Forbes 30 Under 30. They didn't even send flowers. Jason did. But only after I sent him the article myself, like a child holding up a report card hoping for a fridge magnet. I remember once, when I was 15, I stayed up all night building a website from scratch. It was ugly, clunky, but it worked. I showed it to my father during breakfast. He barely glanced at it. "That's nice," he said. "But remember, Olivia, real careers happen in courtrooms or operating rooms." He meant it kindly, I think. At least, that's what I told myself for years. Now I know better. Love in our house wasn't something you felt. It was something you earned. And some people, like Jason, were born already having earned it. Me? I've spent 3 decades chasing it, building companies, breaking records, making more money than I could spend in 3 lifetimes. And still, I'm just the girl with her little computer hobby. If my father was the storm, my mother was the stillness that followed. But not in a comforting way. More like the eerie quiet you get right before everything collapses. Diana Mitchell, my mother, was a woman of high standards and few affections. She was a corporate attorney with an undefeated record and a wardrobe of sharp suits that made her look more like a statue than a person. She always wore a perfect shade of lipstick, kept her hair in a sleek bob, and had the uncanny ability to walk into a room and command it without ever raising her voice. But the one room she never seemed to command was our dining room. I used to think she was neutral, like Switzerland, detached, calm, unaffected. That's what she told herself too, I'm sure. She wasn't cold, she'd say. She just didn't pick sides. But the thing is, when someone hurts you and the person who's supposed to protect you just watches, it feels like a betrayal. She never defended me. Not when my father praised Jason for every minor thing and dismissed my biggest accomplishments. Not when he made backhanded comments about how I lacked direction or should consider a more stable career path. Not when I came home crying after my first failed pitch meeting at 22, and she simply handed me a glass of wine and said, "That's how the world is." She never hugged me when I needed it, never said she was proud of me. At best, she'd say I was resilient, as if that were a consolation prize for never being seen. Her silence was louder than any insult my father ever delivered. Every holiday felt like a performance. Jason was the star. My parents were the adoring audience. And I was just there, sitting in the wings, clapping politely for a show I wasn't allowed to join. My father adored Christmas. He'd dress in his tailored sweater, pour himself a whiskey, and stand by the fireplace like a CEO at an end-of-year shareholders meeting. Every year, he gave the same kind of toast, long, elaborate, glowing monologues about Jason's achievements. This year, my son led a clinical trial at Northwestern. At just 35, can you believe that? He'd say, voice thick with pride. He's everything a man could hope for in a son. There was always a pause after that line, a silence where, if you listened closely, you could almost hear what he wasn't saying. And Olivia? Well, she's doing something with computers, I guess. No one ever laughed. They didn't have to. The silence did it for them. One year, I built an emergency response app that saved lives during a severe winter storm in Michigan. It got media coverage, recognition, an award. I brought the plaque home for Christmas, hoping maybe, just maybe, someone would ask me about it. Instead, my father toasted to Jason's incredible leadership in the hospital and said, "The world needs more men like him." My mother nodded, her wine glass catching the lights from the Christmas tree. I excused myself from the table and cried in the upstairs bathroom, the sound of laughter muffled by the door. I always wondered if my mother noticed, if she saw how her silence fractured me. Or maybe she did, and just didn't think I was worth the fight. I built everything on my own. From the cracked plastic keyboard in my childhood bedroom to the polished mahogany desk in my downtown office, it was all me. No family trust fund, no backroom favors, no brotherly endorsements, just sleepless nights, caffeine-fueled code marathons, and a burning determination to be more than the afterthought I had been treated as my entire life. At 32, I'd finally arrived. My tech company, Secure Communications for Hospitals, was acquired in a multi-million-dollar deal. I had options, respect, and freedom. I should have felt victorious. Instead, all I could think about was one man who still saw me as the girl who played with gadgets. My father, Dr. Richard Mitchell, surgeon, family patriarch, and resident expert in withholding affection. I didn't need his approval. At least that's what I told myself. But as December crept closer and the familiar weight of the holidays pressed down on me, I found myself doing something I never thought I would. I bought him a gift, not a book, not a bottle of bourbon or a monogrammed tie clip. No, I bought him an all-inclusive luxury vacation, 7 nights in an oceanfront suite at the Amara Resort in Santorini. Private infinity pool, personal chef, daily spa treatments, $50,000 of curated perfection, hand-picked for the man who had everything, except, apparently, the capacity to love his daughter. I chose it carefully. It was opulent, yes, but not flashy. Classic. Sophisticated. The kind of gift that screamed, "Look at me, I've made it. I'm not just a silly girl with a startup anymore. I'm someone worth celebrating." It was stupid, I know that now. But at the time, I wrapped the itinerary in crisp, expensive parchment, sealed it in a black envelope with a red wax crest, like it was a contract, a transaction. Maybe it was. Somewhere deep down, I think I believed that $50,000 could finally buy me what I'd been starved of since childhood: Acknowledgement. Of course, I told no one. Jason didn't need to know. Neither did my mother. They would have just said it was too much, that I was trying too hard, or worse, that it was inappropriate. But none of them knew what it was like, growing up being compared to Jason, year after year, while no one so much as asked you how your science fair project went. Christmas in our house had always been two celebrations in one. My father's birthday fell on December 21st, so every year we had a double feature, half birthday bash, half holiday cheer, all centered around him. There were speeches, champagne, two separate cakes. Everyone pretended it was about the whole family, but it never was. It was the Richard Mitchell show. Jason always brought gifts with meaning. A vintage surgical tool set one year, a framed photograph of their fishing trip another, and he always gave his speech first. Eloquent, heartfelt, perfectly timed. This year, I thought, this year it will be different. This year, I would hand my father the envelope, he'd open it, and maybe, just maybe, he'd look at me the way he looked at Jason, with pride, with surprise, with something resembling love. But even as I pictured that moment, that rare flicker of recognition, something inside me shrank. What was I doing? Trying to bribe a man for his affection? Hoping that first-class tickets and ocean views could fill a hole he'd carved into me years ago? It was pathetic. And yet, I still brought the envelope. I still wrapped it in silver ribbon and placed it carefully in my purse. Because when you've spent your whole life being invisible, even the faintest hope of being seen is enough to make you do foolish things. The morning of Christmas Eve, I stood in front of my closet for almost an hour. It's strange how a wardrobe filled with polished suits and silk blouses can suddenly feel empty when you're dressing not for yourself, but for someone else's impossible standards. I had options. Too many, probably. Chanel, Alexander McQueen, Max Mara. But nothing felt quite right. I wasn't dressing for a gala or a business pitch. I was dressing for a man who had spent my entire life pretending not to see me. Somewhere in the back of my mind, I heard my mother's voice. Last Thanksgiving, I complimented her blazer. She casually mentioned it was Carolina Herrera. Your father always thought her tailoring was elegant without being showy. Elegant without being showy. There it was. The code. The language of approval I'd been trying to crack since I was 12. I found the dress tucked between winter coats I rarely wore. It was a dark green Carolina Herrera, modest neckline, long sleeves, and that subtle cinch at the waist that whispered sophistication. I hadn't worn it yet. I'd bought it impulsively during a layover in New York after a client meeting went better than expected. I paired it with gold stud earrings and nude pumps. No bright lipstick, no bold jewelry. Understated. Controlled. Just like he liked it. Looking in the mirror, I hated how much I cared. I hated that I still remembered his offhand remarks from years ago. How red lipstick looked cheap. How women in business needed to look smart, not like they're going to a nightclub. And yet, here I was, dressing like a curated exhibit in the museum of his approval. The drive over was quiet. I barely touched the coffee in my cup holder. Every mile closer to their house felt like peeling off layers of armor I'd spent years forging. Every block was a memory. There was the intersection where I failed my driving test the first time. He told me it was because I lacked focus. Typical, he muttered, as if disappointment was inevitable. There was the cafe we used to go to once a month when I was in high school. I remember asking him if he'd read the article I wrote that won an award. He blinked at me and said, "Let's focus on things that matter, Olivia. School is about performance, not opinions." And the worst one, my first college summer home. I'd gotten an internship at a small but respected tech firm. It wasn't glamorous, but I was thrilled. I brought it up during dinner. My father barely looked up from his roast. "Are they paying you?" "Not much," I admitted, "but it's good experience." "Then it's not a real job," he said, cutting me off. "Jason spent his summer assisting in surgery. That's real work." He never saw me. Not as a builder, not as a thinker. Just a daughter playing dress-up in a world too serious for girls like me. The worst part was, I believed him. For years, I internalized every sneer, every shrug, every silence. I worked harder, slept less, drove myself to the edge again and again, trying to prove him wrong while secretly fearing he was right. And now, standing outside their house, I realized I was doing it again. In a Carolina Herrera dress, with a $50,000 gift in my purse, still chasing crumbs of love from a man who'd rather starve me than admit I had value. It started as a curiosity. You know those ads that pop up between YouTube videos or at the bottom of news articles? Find out your ancestry in minutes. I'd seen 1,000 of them, rolled my eyes at most, but one night, somewhere between insomnia and wine, I clicked. I told myself it was for fun. I wasn't looking for revelations. I just wanted to know if the family lore about being part French, part German had any truth to it. The test arrived in a slim white box. Harmless, scientific. Just a vial, some swabs, and a return envelope. And then, like a whisper in the back of my mind, a thought came. Why not compare? It was ridiculous. I knew it was. But still, I found myself digging through the guest bathroom drawers the next time I visited home. The old black comb sat there, bristling with fine gray strands. My father's hair. I don't know what I was thinking. I told myself it was just an extra data point, nothing more. But somewhere deep down, I knew I wanted an answer to a question I was too scared to say out loud. Weeks passed. I forgot about it. Moved on with product launches, board meetings, the usual chaos. Then the email came. My fingers trembled as I opened the DNA portal. There it was, a flagged mismatch. A note saying that the submitted parental sample does not indicate a biological relationship. My first reaction was laughter, not the joyful kind. The sharp, cracked kind that escapes your throat when something breaks too fast to understand. I reread the result a dozen times, checked the numbers, the sample IDs, the fine print. But it didn't change. It didn't fade into something rational. It just sat there, on my screen, like a weight on my chest. My father wasn't my father. Or at least, not biologically. It's hard to describe what that does to a person. You don't just question your past, you question the very texture of your memories. Did that distant tone, that quick dismissal, come from love that failed, or a love that was never there to begin with? Was he cold because he didn't know how to be anything else, or because he looked at me and saw a truth he refused to speak aloud? I printed the result, folded it carefully, and slid it into an envelope. Thick, ivory paper, no markings. I sealed it with wax, more out of instinct than plan. Then I tucked it into the bottom pocket of my handbag and didn't touch it for days. It felt like I'd fallen through a trapdoor in my own life. Suddenly, every cold look, every flinch of indifference, every toast where my name was missing, it all made sense. He knew. Of course he knew. Maybe not the details. Maybe he never did a test of his own. But something in him must have known. Felt it. And instead of asking questions, he turned it into resentment. A quiet punishment. A silent sentence. He treated Jason like a prince. Hugged him. Listened to him. Bragged about him. He brought my nieces gifts. Remembered their birthdays. Carried them on his shoulders during parades. But me? I was tolerated, corrected, ignored. There were no bedtime stories, no father-daughter dances. He never helped me with my science projects or asked me about my friends. When I got my first period, he wouldn't look me in the eye for 2 weeks. When I broke my wrist playing volleyball, he told me it was because I was too clumsy to be an athlete anyway. I used to think I wasn't lovable, that maybe something in me was broken, some invisible flaw that only he could see. Now I wonder if he never let himself love me at all, because I was a daily reminder of something he couldn't control, a secret he never chose, never accepted. And what about my mother? Did she know? Did she carry this secret in her stomach all these years, like a stone she couldn't swallow? I wanted to confront her. I wanted to scream and cry and shake the truth out of her, but I didn't. Not yet. Instead, I buried the envelope under a stack of notebooks in my closet. But I kept the bag with me everywhere I went. It sat there, nestled beside my wallet and keys, humming like a live wire. A silent, sealed reckoning, a truth waiting to be unleashed. And even as I stood in the mirror that morning, dressed in the kind of understated elegance I thought might finally earn me his approval, I realized something cruel and liberating. I had never been living my life. I had been cast in someone else's play, handed a role I didn't ask for, told to smile through scenes I didn't write. A daughter by name, but never by heart. And this Christmas, I wasn't playing that part anymore. I couldn't wait until Christmas Day. The house would be crowded, the air thick with performative joy, my brother's booming laugh, and my mother's perfectly arranged hors d'oeuvres. Too many eyes, too many witnesses. I needed it to be quieter. So I chose his birthday instead. December 21st, the pre-celebration, as my mother liked to call it. We always did something small, a late lunch, a glass of wine, a cake from the same upscale bakery my father pretended to hate, but always devoured. That morning, I got dressed in silence. The envelope with the DNA test stayed hidden in my bag, untouched. But the gift, was packed in a black envelope with silver lining, placed carefully in a leather portfolio. I felt like I was carrying something radioactive. The drive to their estate felt endless. I knew every curve of the road, every cluster of trees that lined their long driveway. I had memorized that landscape from 1,000 childhood trips, where I sat in the back seat, quietly counting how long it took my father to ask me about school. Sometimes he never did. The house rose in front of me, like a monument to everything he valued. Stone, steel, silence. When I rang the bell, it wasn't a servant who opened the door. It was him. "Olivia," he said flatly, eyebrows raised. "You're early." "I thought I'd stop by before things get too busy," I replied. My voice sounded steadier than I felt. He stepped aside, letting me in with the same cool detachment he'd always carried like a second skin. The foyer smelled like cedar and faint cologne. His cologne. It never changed. Neither did he. "How's work?" he asked as we moved toward the sitting room. Not because he wanted to know, but because that was his default line when he couldn't think of anything else to say. "Good," I said. "Busy. I brought something for you." I pulled out the envelope and handed it to him before he had time to deflect or dismiss. He took it reluctantly, eyes narrowing. "What's this?" "Your birthday gift." He opened it slowly, sliding out the thick cardstock itinerary with its gold-trimmed edges. For a second, just a second, I saw something flicker in his face. The Amara Resort, Santorini, 7 nights, personal chef, spa treatments, ocean view. He loved to travel. It was the one thing that made his eyes light up. We all knew that. Ever since I was a kid, he'd collect brochures from exotic hotels and keep them in a drawer. He said someday, when he had time, he'd visit all of them. Most he never did. "This is..." He paused, his voice catching. "Is this real?" "It's all paid for," I said softly. "I thought you'd like it." He blinked. "This is... Olivia, this is too much. This is a $50,000 trip." "I know." "You shouldn't have bought this," he said sharply. "What are you trying to prove?" I swallowed hard. "I got a promotion," I said, my voice quiet but unwavering. "The company I built, my company, it merged with a national firm. I'm leading the integration. It's a big deal." He stared at me, unreadable. His eyes moved back to the itinerary, then to me, then back again. "I just thought, you've always wanted to go," I added. "And I wanted you to have it. I thought it might make you happy." The silence that followed was suffocating. He didn't smile. He didn't say thank you. He just held the gift in his lap like it was something he didn't know how to touch. And suddenly, I felt 10 years old again. Still trying, still hoping, still waiting to be enough. He turned the glossy itinerary over in his hands like it was some foreign object, something he couldn't quite believe was real. Then came the words, the ones that dropped like cold stones into the room between us. "Well?" he said slowly. I suppose it wouldn't have hurt to add a few more nights. And if you're spending this much already, a private flight would have been more appropriate. I blinked, just once, not hard, but I felt something shift inside me, like a final thread snapping. Then, after a pause, he added, Still, thank you. He stood, walked to the cabinet behind his desk, and opened the bottom drawer. He placed the envelope inside, gently, like he was filing away a receipt. He didn't look at me again. That was it. That was all. No hug, no smile, no, I'm proud of you. Just a comment about upgrades and a drawer closing like a door between us. I left before my mother got home. She was at the club, as always. I drove through the cold silence of December streets with my gloved hands gripping the wheel too tightly, the red and white Christmas lights outside blurring through the windshield like the lights of a passing train. When I got back to my apartment, I kicked off my shoes, grabbed the envelope with the DNA results from the bottom of my bag, and held it in my hands for a long time. Then I called Clara. Clara had been my best friend since college. We'd coded our first app together in a dorm room full of empty coffee cups and late-night takeout. She was the closest thing I had to a sister, and the only person I had told about the test. She picked up on the second ring. Well? I gave it to him, I said. And? He said I should have booked a private flight. There was a beat of silence. Oh, Olivia. I told him it was a promotion gift, that I wanted to make him happy. And did he seem happy? No, I said. Not really. He thanked me and put it in a drawer. There was more silence. Clara never filled space just to fill it. She let it breathe, let me feel it. I still have the test, I said finally. He doesn't know. Liv. I could show him. No, she said quickly. Don't. What if he already knows? I whispered. What if this is why he's never loved me? What if that's the missing piece? And what if it makes everything worse? She asked gently. What if it doesn't change anything? I don't need it to change him, I said. I think I just need to stop lying to myself. Another pause. I could hear her breathing, could imagine her sitting on her worn-down couch with her knees pulled to her chest. I think I already know I'm going to do it, I said. Maybe not tomorrow, maybe not even on Christmas, but soon. Olivia. I'm tired of wondering. I've lived with a question mark hanging over every memory. I want a full stop. Clara didn't try to change my mind. She never did. But before we hung up, she said something that stuck with me. Just remember, whatever's in that envelope doesn't define who you are. You built your life. You earned your name. I stared at the envelope long after the call ended, and I thought, then why does it still feel like someone else's? Christmas Day arrived like a performance I had already seen 100 times. The snow outside was clean and decorative, like it had been choreographed, the kind that looked perfect in photos but melted the second you touched it, just like this family. I dressed in a winter white coat and brought a bottle of wine I knew no one would drink. It wasn't for them. It was for me, to look like I belonged, like I still cared. As I pulled into the long, circular driveway of the estate, I already felt the shift. My stomach tightened the way it always did when I crossed that invisible line between my life and their house. The driveway sparkled with holiday lights, and soft music floated out through the open windows, a jazz version of Silent Night. Of course, I braced myself, not for anything specific, just the usual, stupid questions, forced smiles, the awkward clink of champagne flutes from people who didn't even realize I hadn't been hugged. They would ask about my job in that condescending tone, still doing that computer stuff? Or comment on how thin I looked, which was just a polite way of saying I seemed fragile. They'd mean well, maybe, but no one would listen to my answers. No one ever really cared why I was there. Still, I rang the doorbell. My mother answered. Olivia, she said, the smile bright and practiced. But her eyes, at least for a moment, softened. You look lovely. Come in, come in. The scent of pine and cinnamon hit me first, then the warmth, then the music. Everything was decorated perfectly, every garland symmetrical, every ornament coordinated. My mother would never allow otherwise. I handed her the wine. She barely glanced at the label. "How thoughtful," she said, already turning to direct someone to put it with the others. As I stepped inside, I heard it. My father's voice. "And the chef specializes in Mediterranean cuisine. The itinerary says we'll have sunset dinners by the cliffs every evening. It's quite the escape." Laughter followed. One of his friends, no doubt, the kind who wore loafers indoors and called people by their last names. I looked toward the voice and saw him, my father, in a navy cashmere sweater, scotch in hand, gesturing like a man making a keynote speech. He was surrounded by three men I didn't recognize, probably colleagues or board members. And then he saw me, our eyes met, just for a second. But he said nothing, not even a nod. He turned back to his audience, laughing at his own story, basking in their admiration for the trip I had given him. With a private chef, apparently. I stood still for a moment, swallowed the heat rising in my throat, and moved toward the dining room. "Olivia!" a voice called. I turned, and for once my heart lifted. It was Aunt Helen and Uncle Joe, my mother's sister and her husband, the only two people in this house who had ever looked at me like I mattered. "Look at you," Aunt Helen said, pulling me into a warm, real hug. "You're glowing. Is it love or success?" "Neither," I said, smiling faintly. "Just caffeine and good lighting." Uncle Joe chuckled, clapping a hand on my shoulder. "Smart girl. You made it in time for dessert, and I made sure no one touched the bourbon pecan pie until you arrived." It was small, but it was something. Something that reminded me I wasn't invisible to everyone, just to the one person whose acknowledgement I had chased my whole life. And as the house buzzed with champagne and lights and the illusion of family, I slipped my hand into my bag and touched the envelope. Still there. Still waiting. Dinner was set for 6. At exactly 5:59, the door burst open with a gust of cold air and laughter. Jason had arrived. Of course. My mother rushed to greet him, cheeks flushed with excitement. My father rose from his seat as if royalty had entered the room. "There he is," he boomed, stretching out his arms for an embrace. "The man of the hour." Jason chuckled, brushing snow from his coat. "Hardly, Dad. It's your day." "Nonsense," my father said. "Every day is better when my son's here." I stood by the fireplace, a glass of untouched champagne in hand, invisible as usual. I watched the way my father clapped him on the back, the way he laughed too loudly at a joke Jason hadn't even finished. It was the kind of affection I had imagined once, a lifetime ago, when I still believed I had a chance at earning it. As the greetings settled and people moved into the living room for drinks, my younger cousins drifted toward me, daughters of Jason's godparents, teenage girls with big eyes and even bigger curiosity. "Olivia," one of them said, "is it true you bought Uncle Richard that trip to Greece?" I nodded, smiling thinly. "Yes." "That's so cool," another chimed in. "I mean, who even thinks of that? My dad said it's like the trip of a lifetime. You're like crazy successful, right? Do you have a yacht or something?" "No yacht," I said softly. "Just good Wi-Fi and a lot of late nights." They giggled and wandered off, but their words lingered. Crazy successful. I should have felt something, pride, maybe, gratitude, but all I felt was the burn in my chest, the bitter knowledge that no amount of recognition from the fringes could ever replace the void that pulsed dead center. Eventually, everyone gathered in the living room. The lights dimmed just slightly, soft jazz playing under the murmur of voices. My mother handed my father a fresh glass of scotch, and with a slight clink of crystal, he stood. "All right," he said, raising his glass. "A few words, if I may." The room hushed. All eyes turned to him. "I've had a lot to be grateful for this year," he began, his voice deep and practiced. "A thriving practice, A wife who still puts up with me, and children who, well, most of them, make me proud. Light laughter, knowing glances. My breath caught in my throat. And then he said it. I'm proud of all my children, except for one unsuccessful daughter. Silence. Just for a beat. Then nervous chuckles. People assumed it was a joke. I didn't move. But in fairness, he added, swirling the amber liquid in his glass, even she managed to do all right for herself. Built a company, made some money, bought her old man a trip. He looked right at me then, cold, flat. And even though she thinks it's her achievement, I know the truth. A pause. Because everything she is, she owes to me. The room froze. I stared at him, the warmth draining from my body. My mouth went dry. No one said a word. Not my mother, not Jason. Not even those sweet cousins who'd called me generous just moments ago. I stood up, walked over to him in silence, and then, with steady hands, I reached into my bag and pulled out the envelope. I placed it gently on the table in front of him. "Happy holidays, dear father," I said. Then I turned, and I walked away. When I placed the envelope on the table, it felt like setting down a weight I had carried my whole life. Not a gift. A burden. A truth I had never asked for, sealed in paper and silence, and I gave it to him in front of everyone, because I couldn't carry it alone anymore, because it wasn't just mine, it was his. Maybe it always had been. He stared at it, confused at first. Then something shifted in his eyes. Uncertainty, maybe. Or fear. But he didn't reach for it. He didn't speak. The room held its breath. And I finally exhaled. I turned to leave. The words came out cold, but steady. Years of pain shaped into a single sharp edge. Oh, and I'll be canceling the trip to Greece. A collective gasp, small and stifled. "You don't deserve it," I said. "You never did." No one stopped me. My mother blinked, lips parted as if about to speak, but nothing came. Jason looked stunned. Maybe for the first time in his life, he didn't know what to say. Good. I didn't wait for applause, or guilt, or apology. I just walked. Through the sitting room, past the Christmas tree, past the photos on the wall of a family I no longer recognized as my own. My heels echoed against the marble floor like punctuation marks to a story I was done telling. I stepped out into the cold. The snow had started again, soft, silent flakes settling around me as I walked to my car. I got in, closed the door, and sat there for a moment in the stillness. My hands trembled, but not from fear. From release. I took out my phone. There were already messages. Clara, probably. Maybe my aunt. I didn't read them. I powered the phone off. Not silent mode. Not do not disturb. Off. Because I didn't want to be reachable. Not tonight. Not by them. I didn't need my father's voice in my ear. I didn't need his approval. Not anymore. For the first time in my life, I felt clean. Like I had burned something toxic out of my bloodstream. Like I had walked out of a story that never really belonged to me. And as I pulled onto the road, headlights cutting through the snowy dark, I realized something that nearly brought tears to my eyes. I didn't feel empty. I felt free. The tires hummed softly against the snow-slick road as I drove, the silence inside the car thick with everything unsaid. The heat from the vents curled around my frozen fingers, but it couldn't thaw the memory that had started to replay the moment I left the estate. Jason's voice. That call. The warning. It had come earlier that day, just a few hours before dinner, when I was still deciding whether to wear the white coat or the navy one. My phone buzzed with his name. Jason M. I almost didn't answer. Part of me knew. Part of me always knew when a conversation would be less about connection and more about control. "Olivia," he said the moment I picked up, "can we talk?" "Sure," I said carefully, already on guard. "I just got off the phone with Mom," he began, his tone smooth but tense. "She said you asked her some weird questions this week." I said nothing. "She told me you asked about her college years. What she was like, who she dated, if she ever. He stopped, exhaling. What's going on with you? I bit the inside of my cheek. Just curious, I said, trying to understand a few things. He sighed. Olivia, come on. What are you trying to dig up? What's the point? There was a pause, a crackle of static. Then his voice, low and sharp. Why are you giving Dad such an expensive gift? Why now? And why are you interrogating Mom like she's on trial? I wasn't interrogating her, I said, holding the phone tighter. I just asked some questions. I wanted to know more. That's not a crime. It is when it feels like you're trying to break something, he snapped. This family is finally in a good place. There's harmony. You know how rare that is? And now you're acting like you want to destroy it. I closed my eyes. I'm not trying to destroy anything, Jason. Then stop it. Stop the questions. Stop the drama. Dad's birthday, Christmas. It's not the time. It's never the time for you to play the rebel. That word, rebel, as if asking why I was never loved was an act of aggression. As if not sitting quietly in the corner while being ignored and dismissed was a rebellion. I'm not doing this for attention, I said quietly. I'm doing it because I deserve to know the truth. You're going to ruin things, Olivia, he said, colder now. Dad's finally relaxed. Mom isn't constantly on edge. We're all okay. Just leave it alone. There it was. The Mitchell mantra. Pretend, smile. Preserve the illusion, even if it meant sacrificing one person to keep everyone else comfortable. I'm not okay, I whispered. You've just never noticed. He didn't respond. Not really. He just said, don't make tonight about you, and hung up. The memory of that call sat like ice on my chest as I drove. He thought I wanted to destroy harmony. But how do you destroy something that never existed? All I ever wanted was the truth. And tonight, I gave it to them. Wrapped in silence. Delivered in front of everyone. No theatrics. Just truth. If that shattered their illusions, so be it. The next morning, the sky outside my window was a dull sheet of gray. The snow had stopped sometime in the night, leaving behind a silence that felt too clean, too sterile. I hadn't slept much. I kept waking in the dark, half expecting a knock at the door or a message lighting up my screen. When the phone finally rang, it was past 10 a.m. Mom. I stared at the screen for a moment. Then I answered. She didn't greet me, didn't ask how I was. She just said, in a voice so soft I barely recognized it, Olivia, he's not your father. The words hung there. For a moment, I thought I'd imagined them. But I hadn't. She said them again, slower this time. Your father, Richard, he's not your biological father. I didn't move. I didn't speak. I was with someone, she said, before I met him. It was brief. I was young, stupid maybe. His name was Michael. He was different. Wild. A writer. A hollow laugh broke through her throat. Your eyes. You got his eyes. I used to see it when you were little, and it terrified me. I still couldn't speak. My fingers gripped the phone, knuckles white. I didn't know I was pregnant when I married Richard. I found out a few weeks after the wedding. And I told him. I did tell him. He said he'd raise you as his own. But he didn't, I whispered. He never did. There was silence on her end. I thought it would pass, she said. That he'd soften, that he'd forget. But he never could. Not really. He punished you for it. Quietly. I saw it. I let it happen. And I'm sorry, Olivia. God, I am so sorry. Tears welled in my eyes, but I didn't let them fall. I spent my whole life thinking I wasn't good enough, I said. I know, she whispered. I know. And I will never forgive myself for what that did to you. I sat down on the edge of the bed, heart thudding like a slow, heavy drum. Why now? I asked. Why tell me now? Because the moment you gave him that envelope, I knew. I saw it on your face. You already knew. You just needed someone to say it out loud. She paused. And you deserve more than silence. Another call buzzed in. Jason. I declined it. It rang again. And again. Then a message popped up. Jason. Olivia. Return the ticket. Just give him the trip. Don't do this. He's furious. You're making things worse. Another message. Jason. What are you trying to accomplish? Humiliating him in front of the whole family? Just undo it and walk away. And another. Jason. You've made your point. Don't take away the one thing he actually looked forward to. I let the phone drop to the bed. I stared out the window, the city blurry through the frost. Jason didn't know. Of course he didn't. If he had, he would have weaponized it long ago. Or maybe even he couldn't imagine a world where Richard Mitchell wasn't exactly who he claimed to be. I closed my eyes, let the silence settle back in. My mother's voice, broken and real, echoed in my head. I'm sorry. She was right about one thing. I already knew. But hearing it broke something in me. And strangely, it also mended something else. I didn't answer Jason's texts. I didn't call my mother back. Instead, I sat at my desk, opened my laptop, and began typing in the only name I had. Michael. She hadn't given me a last name. Just Michael. A writer. Someone she described as wild, untethered. Not the kind of man you brought home to a wealthy family with a reputation to maintain. It was almost laughable. My whole life had been shaped by a secret from a man who disappeared before I took my first breath. But I searched anyway. After hours of dead ends and digging, I found him. Michael Caldwell. Once a poet, now a creative writing professor at a small liberal arts college in Vermont. His face stared back at me from the university faculty page. Soft gray beard, warm brown eyes, a little weathered, but not cold. Not like him. My heart thudded so loud, I thought I could hear it echo. I stared at his face for a long time before I wrote the message. I kept it simple, honest, gentle. Hi, Michael. My name is Olivia Mitchell. I believe you knew my mother, Diana, many years ago. I recently learned that you may be my biological father. I'm not reaching out to ask anything from you. I just wanted to say hello, to reach across the distance between then and now. I hope this message finds you well. I hit send before I could second-guess myself. And then I waited. It took less than a day. His reply came the next evening, and I swear, the moment I saw his name in my inbox, my lungs forgot how to work. Dear Olivia, I admit, this is quite a surprise. Diana, yes. I remember her very well. I never imagined I might have a daughter out there. I would love to talk more. I don't know what kind of story you've lived, but if you want to share any part of it with me, I'll be here. And for what it's worth, I'm glad you reached out. Warmly, Michael. I stared at the words for a long time, unable to stop the tears from sliding silently down my cheeks. Warmly. That single word meant more than all of Richard Mitchell's empty handshakes and condescending toasts combined. Then my phone rang again. This time, Aunt Helen. I answered. Olivia, she said, voice low and cautious. What was in the envelope? I paused. I don't know what he told you, she continued, but your father, Richard, he's furious. He stormed into the kitchen last night, screaming at your mother. He was shaking. He broke a glass. I closed my eyes. I asked him what was in the envelope, she said, but he wouldn't answer. Just kept saying, she thinks she knows everything. She thinks she can just humiliate me. A pause. Olivia, what did you give him? I opened my mouth, closed it, then said quietly, the truth. Aunt Helen was silent. And it was about time someone did. She didn't press further, didn't ask for the details, just exhaled slowly and said, well, I hope you're okay. I am, I said, and for the first time in my life, I meant it. The snow had started falling again. I sat curled on my couch, wrapped in a wool blanket, watching the flakes swirl outside my window like tiny paper cuts from the sky. Everything looked quiet, peaceful, but inside, I felt like I was standing on the edge of something wide and unfinished. The phone rang. Mom. I debated whether to answer. Then I did. Her voice was soft, fragile, like someone trying to tiptoe across broken glass. Olivia, she said, I wanted to talk. Really talk. I waited. I'm sorry, she whispered. Not just for the lie, not just for the secret, but for everything after. I said nothing. I'm sorry he couldn't love you, she continued. I'm sorry he looked at you and saw something that reminded him of a mistake instead of a miracle. My chest tightened. Her voice cracked. You were never a mistake, she said. You were mine. And I loved you from the second I knew you existed. I didn't know how to protect you from what came next. That's when the words finally escaped me, low and sharp. Why didn't you protect me? Silence. You knew, I said. You saw what he did to me. Every time he ignored me, dismissed me, belittled me in front of everyone. You saw it, and you did nothing. I know, she said, voice breaking. I told myself I was keeping the peace. I thought if I stayed quiet, things would get better. I didn't realize I was letting you drown. My throat burned. You stood by and watched him starve me of love for years, Mom. And you let him. I know, she said again, and I will carry that guilt forever. A part of me wanted to forgive her. Another part wasn't ready. Before I could speak, my phone buzzed again. An email notification. My heart sank as I glanced at the subject line. Subject, legal notification. Richard Mitchell vs. Olivia Mitchell. I opened it. It was real. A formal letter from his attorney. Filed through his legal team. A demand for restitution. He was suing me. My father, no, Richard, was suing me to return the cost of the Santorini trip. $50,000. The letter called it an extravagant and emotionally manipulative gift, and claimed I had willfully withdrawn the agreed benefit, causing him emotional distress and reputational damage. My mother was still talking, but her words faded into static. He was suing me, not calling, not writing, not asking why. He had gone straight to lawyers. He had turned my peace offering into a court case. I stood up slowly, staring at the email, and then I laughed. Not a joyful laugh. A stunned, sharp, cracked lip kind of laugh that echoed in the hollow place where a daughter's love used to live. It was over. There was no going back now. I didn't panic when I read the lawsuit. I didn't cry. I didn't curse. I didn't even feel anger anymore. I felt nothing. Because when you've spent your entire life fighting for scraps of affection, and then the man who was supposed to be your father hands you a court summons instead of an apology, what's left to fear? Let him sue me. Let him throw tantrums in mahogany-paneled rooms and spit his bitterness into legal briefs. I wasn't afraid. Not anymore. I closed the email, went back to my tea, and reminded myself, you are free now. But then my phone rang. Blocked number. I stared at it, thumb hovering above the screen. Then, without knowing why, I answered. Olivia, came his voice, low, measured, too calm. I didn't say anything. I've been thinking, he said. Maybe this trip, it was too much for you to understand. Maybe that test you gave me, it's not even accurate. Those things are never 100%. I looked it up. I stayed silent. I think you should take the ticket back, he said, tone tightening. Use it yourself if you want. I don't care. But let's just end this. Why? I asked. Is your pride hurting? Or did the court paperwork not feel as satisfying as humiliating me in front of a room full of people? I'm trying to be reasonable, he said. You never were. There was a pause. I raised you, he said coldly. I gave you a life. I gave you discipline. You gave me silence, I said. You gave me a lifetime of feeling like a ghost in my own home. More silence. I don't want to hear your voice anymore, I said. Have Jason buy your damn ticket. I'm sure he'll get you a better seat. He didn't respond. I hung up. And for the first time, I didn't feel the need to check if he would call back. Because now, I was finally, completely done. Work had never been better. Maybe it was because I had finally shaken off the weight of needing anyone's validation, or maybe it was because I'd stopped shrinking myself to fit into a family that never made room for me. But suddenly, everything clicked. My startup, once a modest passion project, was now part of a nationwide brand integration. I was overseeing a new regional expansion and leading the creative direction. People actually listened to me in meetings, not because they were supposed to, but because they wanted to. I had a corner office, a team that respected me, and clients who didn't care what my last name was. They cared that I delivered. And I did. One of my colleagues, someone I had mentored when she was fresh out of school, called me a force. I almost laughed, not because she was wrong, but because I'd spent most of my life believing I was the weak one, the failure, the spare. Turns out, I was just never allowed to shine before. Even my mother changed. After our conversation, something inside her cracked open. She started calling, really calling, not to ask what I was doing, but to ask how I was doing. She even visited me at my apartment one Sunday, bringing coffee and old photos from her college years. We sat on the floor and went through them. She pointed out Michael in one of the pictures, a young man with intense eyes and an unruly grin. "You have his stubborn mouth," she said, smiling a little. "I used to love that about him." She told me about poetry readings, late-night debates, how he made her feel like she could do anything. "I was scared of that," she admitted. "I chose safety instead." But now, she didn't hide anymore. She asked about my work, my travels, my ideas. She even said, for the first time in my adult life, "I'm proud of you." I didn't cry when she said it, but I felt something shift. I was no longer the child waiting to be seen. I was seen. And now? Now I was packing for Greece. The irony wasn't lost on me. The trip that had once been meant as a desperate offering to my father was now mine, and mine alone. The resort reissued the booking in my name. I upgraded it. I added a second week, extended the spa access, and reserved a private sunset cruise. Clara squealed when I told her. "You're actually going! Oh my God, Liv, you're doing it! You're living your revenge arc in a silk caftan." "I'm doing it for peace," I said. She smirked. "And that's why it's so powerful." I bought new luggage, white with gold trim. I ordered paperbacks I'd never had time to read, packed linen dresses, and even splurged on the pair of sunglasses I'd once told myself were too indulgent. Because now, nothing I gave myself was too much. I was no longer trying to prove anything, not to my father, not to Jason, not to anyone. This trip wasn't a gift to impress someone. It was a gift to honor myself. And when I board that plane, I won't be running away. I'll be flying toward the life I built, with no one's permission and no one's name but my own.